After Mustafar, Darth Vader was more machine than man, but the suit that saved his life wasn't built for comfort or even for combat. It was designed to control him, to limit him, and to keep him in constant pain. Today, we're diving deep into the terrifying reality of Vader's armor, what it could do, what it couldn't, and why it was one of the greatest tragedies of his fall. In the Legends novel, Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, Vader has some inner monologue after a conversation with Palpatine via hologram. He reflects on how where Darth Sidious had gained everything, he had lost everything. This included, at that point at least, the self-confidence and skill that Anakin Skywalker had possessed. It begun with his movement. What remained of his real limbs ended in bulbs of grafted flesh, inserted into machines that triggered movement through the use of modules that interfaced with his damaged nerve endings. He was dismayed by the incompetence of the medical droids responsible for rebuilding him on Coruscant. Instead of using Durasteel for his lower legs, they had substituted an inferior alloy and had failed to inspect the strips that protected the electromotive lines. As a result, the inner lining of his pressurized bodysuit was constantly snagging on places where the strips were anchored to knee and ankle joints. The tall boots he wore were poor for his artificial feet, whose claw-like toes lacked the electrostatic sensitivity of his equally false fingertips. Raised in the heel, it tipped him slightly forward, forcing him to move with exaggerated caution to prevent him from stumbling or falling. Due to their heavy weight, he often found himself feeling as though he was rooted to the ground, or as if he were moving in high gravity. These limitations resulted in Vader having to call on the Force to assist in his movement. He had pondered abandoning any hope of movement and resigning himself to a repulsor chair. The defects in his prosthetic arms mirrored those of his legs. Only the right one felt natural to him, due to familiarity from the Clone Wars. The heavy cloak and pectoral plating restricted his movement to the point that he could rarely lift his arms over his head. He was forced to adjust his lightsaber technique to combat this. His sight is next. Blurred, narrowed, filtered through a red haze. The pressurized mask was goggle-eyed, fish-mouthed, short-snouted, and needlessly angular over the cheekbones. The dark hemispheres that covered his eyes filtered out any light that may have caused further damage to his corneas and retinas. However, in enhanced mode, the half-globes reddened the light and prevented him from being able to see the toes of his boots without inclining his head almost 90 degrees. He no longer saw through the eyes of Anakin Skywalker. What he sees is distorted, but what about what he hears? The medical droids had rebuilt the cartilage of his outer ears, but his eardrums, having melted in Mustafar's heat, had been beyond repair. Sound waves now had to be transmitted directly to implants in his inner ear, and sounds registered as if issuing from underwater. The sensors lacked any sufficient discrimination, so if too many ambient sounds were picked up, it was difficult to determine their distance and direction. Other times, the sensors pierced him with feedback or attached echo or vibrato effects to even the slightest noise. Even quiet had become an irritant. Sound escapes him, and so does breath. This is where the medical droids had truly failed him. From the control box he wore strapped to his chest, a thick cable entered his torso, linked to a breathing apparatus and heartbeat regulator. The ventilator was implanted in his hideously scarred chest, along with tubes that ran directly into his damaged lungs and others that entered his throat, so that should the chest plate or belt control panels develop a glitch, he could breathe unassisted for a limited time. However, the monitoring panel beeped frequently for no reason, and the constellation of lights only served as reminders of his vulnerability. The incessant rasp of his breathing interfered with his ability to rest, let alone sleep. And sleep, in the rare moments it came to him, was a nightmarish jumble of twisted, recurrent memories that unfolded to excruciating wounds. The Medroids had at least inserted the redundant breathing tubes low enough so that with the aid of an enunciator, his scorched vocal cords could still form sounds and words. Without the enunciator, which provided a synthetic bass tone, his own voice was little more than a whisper. He could take food through his mouth, but only when he was inside a hyperbaric chamber, since he had to remove the triangular respiratory vent that was the mask's prominent feature. As a result, it was easier to receive nourishment through liquids, and to rely on catheters, collection pouches, and recyclers to deal with liquid and solid waste. All these devices made it even more difficult for him to move with ease, let alone any grace. The pectoral armor that protected the artificial lung weighed him down, as did the electrode-studded collar that supported the outsized helmet, necessary to protect the cybernetic devices that replaced the uppermost of his vertebrae, the delicate systems of the mask, and the ragged scars on his hairless head, not only because of what occurred on Mustafar, but also the attempts at emergency trephination that took place on the way back to Coruscant. The synthetic skin that replaced what was burnt from his bones itched constantly, and his body needed to be scrubbed of the dead flesh periodically. Merely 4 weeks into his life in the suit, he had already dealt with claustrophobia, moments of desperation to be free from the shell. He needed to build, or have built, a chamber in which he could feel human again. This all added up to being solitary confinement, prison of the worst sort, continual torture. It was nothing more than wreckage. Power without clear purpose. Darth Vader's suit wasn't just armor, it was a cage. A constant reminder of everything he'd lost and everything he'd become. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. I hope this breakdown helped you understand just how much pain Vader truly carried beneath the mask. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like, share it around, and subscribe for more deep dives into the Star Wars universe. Until next time, may the Force be with you, always.